Hello, I am Amir Rao. I'm the studio director of Supergiant Games and the co-founder of the company. I'm from the team of 7 people who made Bastion. And last year, we accepted an AIAS award for Best Downloadable Game. And this is me, by the way, looking like I'm about to throw up as we accept, because I was super nervous. That was the culmination, basically, of our Cinderella story that began when me and the co-founder, Gavin Simon, moved into the living room of a house in San Jose and started using the Microsoft XNA framework to build Bastion slowly. We built our team slowly to 7 people, and we debuted on Xbox Live Arcade. But this isn't really about our Cinderella story. It's about the more than year we spent taking Bastion to different platforms. That process, of course, is typically known as porting. And the thing about ports is that everybody hates ports. Developers hate working on ports because they tend to be creatively uninteresting. Platforms hate receiving ports because they tend to be inferior versions of products. And fans especially hate ports because often the thing they're given is some pale version of whatever the first version was. And I think a lot of that is because of the concept of like the lead SKU, right? I used to be a level designer at Electronic Arts, and I worked on a game called Red Alert 3, which started on the PC, and it simultaneously shipped on the Xbox 360. And I at least got to witness a lot of what the struggle was when you try and simultaneously ship versions of games. In the case of Red Alert 3, we were constantly competing for resources, right? Between trying to get the game performant on the 360, but also trying to make a great PC game. And weirdly, the decision to sim ship was kind of motivated by the success of Command & Conquer 3, which we had done over a year and a half before, which was actually a more successful thing. And in that case, the 360 version actually came out a couple months later and was made by a dedicated team. So generally speaking, I think that we shouldn't be surprised when we do things in sort of cynical and disappointing way that they produce cynical and disappointing results. So what that meant for us is that we basically had to have good reasons beyond the obvious business ones. And that started with trying to find an audience. This is, of course, a business reason, but it's also kind of a personal reason. We had great curiosity to know what our game where an old man talks to you the whole time, an isometric, fully 2D, hand-painted world, what kind of player it might find in the various places we put it. The second thing we wanted to do was actually develop relationships with platforms and see what platform holders want out of the games that release on their system. And finally, and this is the most important thing, is we kind of wanted to gain design expertise around each of the things, from gamepad to mouse and keyboard to touch. And part of this was to increase our own chops, and I think another big part of it is because of the transition in the game industry. I don't think we know where gaming is going, and it's almost like a survivability imperative that you be able to design for almost any kind of device. So our approach was that we were going to develop them serially. We were not going to sim ship them, and we were going to use the full team. This process was inspired, actually, by games that we loved that had gone multi-platform, that had come out serially, and somehow each version seemed to be better than the one before it. So, in the case of Plants vs. Zombies, I loved it on PC. I bought it on Steam. Then I bought it on Xbox, and I loved playing it on my TV. Then I bought it again when it came out on iOS. And somehow it seemed to keep getting better and better. And I think these games, I don't have any data on Plants vs. Zombies, but I assume that a lot of these people are actually repeat purchasers. It's hard to have it only on one platform because you keep wanting the experience over and over. So here's the approach we took. So we started with Gamepad, right? That was Xbox Live Arcade. There wasn't necessarily a super strong business reason we started here. We started here because the games that inspired us to quit our jobs at EA were here. Games like Castle Crashers and Braid. And we went from Xbox Live Arcade, and then we did the whole mouse and keyboard family. For us, the mouse and keyboard family was super important because that was our history, that was our heritage. Some of our favorite games were played that way. This family includes Steam, which is the lion's share of the units here. We were in the Chrome browser, PC, Mac App Store. We were on Linux, and in the Humble Bundle. Finally, there was touch. And for us, this was kind of new. That meant iPad and iPhone. And we didn't play a lot of games using tablets or touch devices. In fact, we had to buy the whole team iPads in December 2011 just to sort of motivate ourselves to play on it. This was the port team, of course, speaking to our process. The port team was the same people who actually made the original game. It was the 8 of us. And that was important because we wanted to put kind of all the creative chemistry that went into the original game behind the newest versions of it. And that led to our process. So the design process at Supergiant Games is not really like inspiration driven. I'm often asked about the narration in the game, right? People go, where did you come up with the idea to have a fully reactive narrator? Like we had somehow invented narration in games, but we hadn't. Our process was more problem-solving oriented. What we were trying to do with narration is solve the problem of trying to tell a story at the pace of the player. And narration was a sort of natural way to do that. We had tried lots of other things, like text and various things. And the point for us is you identify a problem, you come up with what the conventional solution is, you try some other solutions, and you can always resolve to the conventional solution. You can always have your text and your NPCs and your subtitles and stuff like that. So we took the same approach when we were trying to translate the game, right? And our design problem that we thought we were trying to solve is how do we take a game that used almost every face button on a gamepad and translate that to a touch interface? And then we looked at the PC version. It used, a mouse and keyboard. It used hotkeys. You kind of do the WASD claw while you move the mouse around. And while that feels great for a lot of game players, it didn't feel like it was going to translate well. And the conventional solutions that we looked at were deeply unsatisfying to us. I think the conventional solution to a third-person isometric game on a lot of tablet devices is virtual gamepads. It's where you have a representation of a stick, a representation of all the buttons you would see on the gamepad. You have the entire HUD spread across the device, and it just didn't feel natural. What felt more natural were games that felt like they were built for touch, right? Games like Jetpack Joyride, where you kind of feel the sensation of movement. And the biggest thing for us about doing this was putting a hard constraint on ourselves that the game be playable with only one hand, and that you could sort of rest the tablet with the other one, because that felt sort of natural to us. And this was the constraint that almost killed the project several times, because it was really hard to get all those buttons and all those game mechanics and all those things distilled down into something where you could just do it all with one hand. And I think that was because we were trying to solve the wrong problem. The reason people love Bastion isn't because you hit Y to heal, or you hold shift to engage the auto lock system, or any of those deeply mechanical things. And it actually forced us to go back and think about what our gameplay was about. So here's where we arrived. As you can see, it's pretty minimal. There's like one button on the screen. You basically tap wherever you want, and the character kind of runs to the point you tap. You can also drag and hold. And the character picks up targets automatically, and you never hit a button to fire. It felt totally unlike what it feels like on other platforms, but it still felt like the original game, even more so than if we'd had virtual buttons everywhere. And actually, when I think about it, this is an early screenshot of Bastion. This is what it looked like in the first month. This is all art scanned out of D&D books, and I modeled that character in Blender, and we stole art from Zelda and from every other place that we could while we were prototyping. It was obviously hideous looking, but what felt good about it from the start was just the sensation of moving around the world. And we basically evolved our touch version to be a game of positioning, where it didn't matter that you were hammering the button to fire. All that mattered is that you put the kid in the right spot, and everything else will come. That isn't to say we didn't also do virtual gamepad. We did this because we wanted to meet the audience expectation for a third-person game on an iPad. I think the really good thing about sort of offering an additional control scheme or alternate control schemes on PC, we had 3, is that it kind of invites the players into your process. The first thing they may consider is, why didn't you do it this way? And you can give it to them, and they can see for themselves why. So in the case of our virtual gamepad controls, where you can see all the buttons on the screen and all the HUD and everything else, 40% of the people try it, but only 20% of the people stick with it, which means 4 out of 5 people end up using the control scheme that we spend the vast majority of our time trying to get right. And of course, we did a ton of other platform-specific work. There was, on XBLA, there's always the TCRs, leaderboards, achievements. On Steam, you do Steam Works, you do Steam Cloud, you make it compatible on a Mac through Steam Play, you offer controller support. Like I said, we had 3 schemes there, full 1080p, soundtrack. We did a really cool tie-in with Portal. For iOS, there's tons of stuff to do. We did touch, virtual gamepads, iCloud, Retina, all these things that are sort of platform-specific, and I think things that platforms appreciate. At the very least, they seem to appreciate it for us. We were part of Summer Arcade. We were featured on Steam numerous times, beat the average incentive in the Humble Bundle. Both our iPad and iPhone versions were featured. I think what's interesting about this for me is going back to the sim shipping thing. The wisdom behind sim shipping is that you're sort of trying to maximize the lightning rod of attention paid. But it looks here like the platforms in general didn't sort of fault us for doing that. We didn't lose an opportunity by not sim shipping. In fact, we may have gained one. It's kind of interesting stat about this, too, is that over 90% of the copies sold, and Bastion sold over 1.7 million copies, were sold after its first month. So it kind of just built over time. And we're not like the only story like this, right? Our story is not unique. Games like Limbo have been on tons of platforms and done very well. World of Goo, The Walking Dead, which is up for a D.I.C.E. award tomorrow, or several, potentially. And I think the thing about games like this, the common thread that I see, is they're all narrative, single-player games. Most of them have sort of pay-up-front mechanics. But the thing about them that feels good, and the thing about them that players want, is totally portable. It's the atmosphere and the story. When these games solve their interface problems on each device, they're able to sort of achieve big audiences. And they didn't do it all simultaneously, necessarily. They did it one after the other after the other. It kind of excites me for what the future of making those kinds of games is, right? It's suddenly kind of like you're a band on tour, and like the first thing you release is just your album launch or something. And then you're going to take all these stops at all these different cities along the way. And some of them may be more out of the way, and those guys really appreciate it when you go there. And some of them are bigger venues. This is an image from sort of one of my personal favorite stops on the tour, which was the Humble Indie Bundle 5, where Bastion was packaged in with Limbo and Amnesia and Psychonauts and Sword and Sorcery. And we got to do a lot of cool stuff, building a trailer together, working together on art, and all that kind of stuff that I think the fans really appreciate. It also makes me wonder if the future of sort of multi-platform design is interface agnostic. That might be this idea that we can simplify things on ourselves by making designs which kind of are super simplified, and they're just going to work on every sort of interface that we put them on. But when I think about that, and when I try and think about what that really means, I tend to come up with really lowest common denominator designs, things that I don't think platforms want and things that I don't think people want. To me, what seems more likely is the future of sort of multi-platform design is more interface elastic, which is to say that what's good about your game and what feels great about your game is actually different on every platform. So what I really like about the 360 version, and this is just a really specific thing, is I love the feeling of rumble on a controller. It's the only platform in which I really, really get to experience that. I love the force feedback nature of it. I love showing the people the game on the TV, like when I show someone new the game. The thing I love about PC is the precision, the feeling of WASD movement, and independent aiming. Those things are just really specific, really just nuanced sort of feedback things that you get out of a platform. What I love about the tablet is just the sense of motion around the world. I mean, it feels like it fits with a game, right? You kind of drag a little marker, and the kid who's always doing his best, who's always trying his hardest, follows it everywhere it goes. It's a more intimate experience. It's a different sensation. Sometimes I wonder if there's this weird, potentially artificial tension between platforms and developers, right? Like platforms sometimes feels like they want novelty. They want something that's unique, that fits only on their platform. And for developers, if you're trying to make a rich experience, often what's novel, isn't really what's rich. What's rich is something that it feels like anyone could have thought of, something that was just executed in a very specific way that has nothing to do with, does it work on the Kinect, or is there unique content for this additional platform, or any of these other kinds of considerations. And it seemed like, at least in our journey, that the platforms didn't care about novelty. They cared more, I think, ultimately, about their fans. And I think when those conversations go the most successfully, it's sort of when the platforms are representing their users and the expectations of their users, and developers are thinking about how they can surprise the users. In fact, I think the most common, we do all our own customer support, right? Like, we get hundreds of emails a month, and we answer them all. They come into our inboxes. We just share the duties of talking about it. And I think the most common sort of fan request is, I want to play your game. I want the game for my platform. And it can be really, really futile and frustrating as a fan. And I feel this personally, when a game that you really want to play kind of comes out somewhere else. And I think you can kind of make a whole business model out of essentially trying to just give your fans what they request. But what they don't want, and what they don't mean, is they want a bad version of your game. So that kind of brings me back. What multi-platformism meant for us, what the sort of, religion around what we were doing, it meant that we wanted to actually be everywhere we could, but only one place at a time. And the reason we needed to be in one place at a time wasn't just because we were resource constrained, but it's because it took us time to actually figure out what was good about our game and gameplay. And I think that distance really helped us kind of get to a place where we understood our own game. Even as the developers, it took us almost a year to know what it was really about. I think even as developers working on this stuff, you need reasons beyond business to motivate quality, right? For us, that was just design expertise, learning about new things. There was some cool tech things going on in the background, too. And ultimately, what fans really want is for you to put the same creative energy that went into making the original game into reimagining it. I think that's sort of really, really important to them, and that's what maybe produces the best stuff. So yeah, I certainly didn't think that I would be spending more than a year working on the same game that I had already released that, in many ways stayed fundamentally the same. But the game had been so good to us, it felt like we sort of owed it something, to treat it with kindness. So just want to thank all the platforms and the players who allowed us to sort of stay together as a team and keep us together for whatever we're going to be doing next. Thank you very much.